Now that Donald Trump has named Brett Kavanaugh as his replacement to Justice Anthony Kennedy on the Supreme Court, I think the question a lot of us are asking ourselves is whether or not this is ultimately going to be the guy that is the deciding vote in an upcoming case that overturns Roe v. Wade. Now, personally, I think it's pretty evident that Donald Trump probably really likes Kavanaugh's stance on executive power, because this is someone who's argued that a sitting president can't be indicted unless they're first impeached. And interestingly enough, this same individual was part of Starr's impeachment effort against Clinton. But conveniently, now that a Republican may be facing impeachment, Kavanaugh's views have shifted. Surprise, surprise. But will this individual be bold enough to overturn decades of precedent with regard to Roe v. Wade? I think that's an open question. I don't know that anyone actually has an answer to that except for Kavanaugh himself. Now, even if he claims that, he can disaggregate his personal opinion on abortion from his judicial philosophy, we all know he's thought about this. We all know that this is someone who is ambitious, who wanted to be on the Supreme Court, who's thought about what he would say if he had the chance to overturn Roe v. Wade. Now, as a federal judge, he said he'd respect the Supreme Court's precedent, but as a Supreme Court justice with power to overturn that decision, we don't actually know what he'd do. He refused to answer the question when Chuck Schumer posed it to him years ago. So generally speaking, I think that Trump was probably motivated by Kavanaugh's stance on executive power, but at the same time, I think Mike Pence, it was clear that he was motivated by Kavanaugh's view on Roe v. Wade. Now, even though he claims that that necessarily wasn't the case, it's clear that Mike Pence is bullshitting all of us. Listen to this interview he did with CNN, and he gave the most slimiest responses a politician could give.
In 2006, Brett Kavanaugh testified that Roe versus Wade is settled law. You campaigned extensively on the notion that Roe versus Wade should be consigned to the ash heap of history. Are you worried that he's not going to follow what you want to do?
Well, Dan, as you know, I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it. And I'm proud to be part of a pro-life administration that's advanced pro-life policies. But what I can assure you is that what the president was looking for here was a nominee who will respect the Constitution as written, who will faithfully uphold the Constitution in all of his interpretations of the law.
Do you still want Roe versus Wade to be overturned?
Well, I do, but I haven't been nominated to the Supreme Court.
Right, but you're part of the administration that campaigned, you and the president campaigned, saying you will find nominees to overturn Roe versus Wade. Will you be disappointed if he is given that opportunity and he doesn't? Will you be disappointed?
Well, let me say, as I said, I stand for the sanctity of life. This administration, this president are pro-life. But, what the American people ought to know is that, as the president said today, this is not an issue that he discussed with Judge Kavanaugh. I didn't discuss it with him either. What we really focused on was the character, the background, the credentials, and the judicial philosophy.
But again, you campaigned so aggressively on finding a nominee who would overturn Roe versus Wade. Do you feel confident? Can you assure the people who voted for you on that notion that this is the man who will do that?
Well, what I can assure people that voted for us is that this will continue to be a pro-life administration. From early in this administration, President Trump has taken decisive steps to advance pro-life values at home and frankly in foreign aid around the world. But what I can also assure people is that the president believes that the proper consideration for a nominee to the court is not about litmus tests. I mean, frankly, we've seen enough of litmus tests over the decades. What we don't want is to have people go to the courts with a specific objective or policy criteria. We want people to go that respect the Constitution as written, will not legislate from the bench.
Right.
And President Trump and I are absolutely convinced
did say that
Judge Kavanaugh is exactly the kind of jurist that the American people in the majority want to.
So in that clip, Mike Pence basically came off as a caricature of a slimy politician that most of us all hate, just rehearsed, obviously bullshitting you and lying through his teeth. I mean, it was just disgusting. And it bothered me that he stated multiple times that he's pro-life. He says, quote, "I'm pro-life. I don't apologize for it, and I'm proud to be part of a pro-life administration that's advanced pro-life policies." And later he said, "I stand for the sanctity of life. This administration, this president are pro-life." So he called himself pro-life 4 different times in one sentence. But you're not pro-life, Mike Pence. You don't get to claim that you're pro-life if you are bombing 8 different countries simultaneously. You don't get to claim to be pro-life if you gave Saudi Arabia weapons that they're now using to commit genocide in Yemen. You don't get to be pro-life if you ignore Israel's massacre of peaceful Palestinian protesters. You don't get to claim that you are pro-life if you're fine with people dying if they don't have health insurance. You don't get to claim to be pro-life if you're against the death penalty. You're not fucking pro-life, Mike Pence. You are the party of death and destruction, and you couldn't care less about life at all. So you're not pro-life. You don't get to claim you're pro-life unless you check all the boxes that communicates to me that you are in fact willing to uphold the sanctity of life in all cases. That means you're against war. You're in favor of single-payer universal health care of some sort. You're against the death penalty. But until you adopt those policy positions, you do not get to call yourself pro-life. You lying fool. Now, on the question of whether or not he wants to overturn Roe v. Wade, it was very clear. He admitted he does. He states, "Well, I do." But I haven't been nominated to the Supreme Court. And what we really focused on was the character, the background, the credentials, and the judicial philosophy of Brett Kavanaugh. Does anybody believe a word that this liar is saying? As the interviewer said, you campaigned on this issue. You vociferously advocated for Roe v. Wade to be overturned. This is what the right has been wanting for decades now, the evangelical right in particular. You don't care that now 57% of the American population thinks abortion should be legal. You don't care that there are decades of precedent that would be undermined. So look, Mike Pence is a liar. I don't believe for 1 minute that this wasn't a consideration. Of course it's a consideration. Don't be duped by him, and I don't think anyone will be duped by him, but I just couldn't not share this clip because he's so fake. He's such a slimy politician. And it looked like he was crying in this clip, or just got done crying. I don't know if any of you have played that game, Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic on Xbox, or any of these games where you get to you have a character and you choose whether or not to be good or evil. Well, as you progress throughout the game and your character becomes more evil, they start to look more evil. And Mike Pence looks like a character in Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic where you've made a lot of evil decisions, and over time, your character starts to look more evil. That's what Mike Pence looks like.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.